It was the summer of 1983 when my family and I moved into an old, creaky house in the middle of nowhere. We were excited to start our new life in the countryside, away from the hustle and bustle of the city. But little did we know, we were not alone in that house. At first, it was just little things like doors opening and closing on their own and the sound of footsteps in empty hallways. We tried to brush it off as just the old house settling, but things started to get more and more strange. One night, my little sister woke up screaming, saying that she had seen a woman in her room. My parents tried to calm her down, but then they heard it too, the sound of a woman crying coming from the hallway. When they went to investigate, there was no one there. As the weeks went by, things only got worse. My parents started to argue all the time, and my brother and I were constantly fighting. We were all on edge, and we couldn't explain why. Then, one day, my brother and I were exploring the attic when we found a dusty old photo album. As we flipped through the pages, we came across a picture of a family, a mother, a father, and 2 children, who looked exactly like us. We were shocked and confused, but then we noticed something even more unsettling. In every single picture, there was a woman in the background, just barely visible. She had long, dark hair and a haunting expression. That's when we realized the woman was the ghost who had been haunting our house. And she wasn't just any ghost, she was a part of our family, a relative we had never known about. She had been trapped in our house for decades, unable to move on. We tried everything we could to help her, but nothing worked. We brought in paranormal investigators. We tried cleansing rituals and exorcisms, but she wouldn't budge. We even tried talking to her, asking her what she wanted, but she would only cry and stare at us with those sad, empty eyes. As time went on, we started to learn more about our mysterious relative. We found out that she had been the youngest daughter of the family in the photo album, and that she had died tragically at a young age. Her parents had never recovered from her death, and they had moved away from the house shortly after. But for some reason, their daughter's spirit had stayed behind. We were all terrified of the ghost, but we also felt a strange sense of obligation to her. She was our family, after all. So we decided to do something drastic. We would move into the house permanently, and we would try to make peace with the ghost. At first, it was tough. We were all constantly on edge, and we were afraid to be alone in the house. But slowly, we started to adapt. We would leave out offerings for the ghost, flowers, trinkets, anything we thought she might like. And eventually, we started to feel her presence less and less. But then, one night, something strange happened. My parents were in the living room, watching TV, when they heard the sound of a baby crying coming from upstairs. They rushed up to investigate, but when they got there, the sound stopped. They searched the whole house, but there was no sign of a baby. They were about to give up when they noticed something strange in the corner of my sister's room. It was a crib, old and dusty, but unmistakably a baby's crib. My parents were horrified. They had never seen anything like it before. The room was completely empty except for a single wooden chair in the center. It looked old and worn, like it had been there for centuries. The walls were made of stone and covered in moss, giving the room a damp and eerie feeling. As they approached the chair, they noticed that there was something etched into the backrest. It was a symbol that neither of them recognized, but it sent shivers down their spines. They tried to shake it off, but the feeling of unease only grew stronger as they stood there. Suddenly, they heard a faint whisper coming from the corner of the room. It was so quiet they could barely make out the words, but they sounded like a warning. They looked at each other, both feeling the same sense of dread, and decided to leave the room. As they walked back down the hallway, they heard footsteps following them. They quickened their pace, but the footsteps only grew louder. They finally made it to the end of the hallway and burst through the door, only to find themselves back in the living room. They were both panting and sweating, trying to catch their breath. They looked at each other, both wondering if what they had just experienced was real or just their imagination. But deep down, they both knew that something was not right in that house. They decided to leave and never come back. As they were getting into their car, they saw a figure standing in the window, watching them. It was the same figure they had seen earlier, but this time it seemed closer, almost within reach. They quickly drove away, leaving the house behind. But they could not shake the feeling of unease that had settled over them. They knew that they had stumbled upon something sinister, something that was better left alone. And so, they never spoke of their experience again. But they never forgot the feeling of fear that had taken hold of them in that old, abandoned house. It was a reminder that some things are better left undisturbed, for fear of what may be lurking in the darkness. I worked as a teacher in a school for many years, and during that time, I witnessed many strange occurrences. However, nothing could have prepared me for the events that would unfold when a new school psychologist, Dr. Elizabeth Wilson, arrived at our school. Dr. Wilson was highly recommended and quickly became an integral part of the school community. Her kind and caring nature made her beloved by both students and staff, and she had a unique ability to make even the most troubled students feel at ease. But despite her friendly demeanor, something about Dr. Wilson always gave me the creeps. It was as though there was something lurking beneath the surface, something dark and sinister. One day, I heard strange noises coming from Dr. Wilson's office. It sounded like a group of students whispering and giggling. Curious, I knocked on the door, but there was no answer. I tried the handle, and to my surprise, it was unlocked. I opened the door and walked in, only to find that the room was empty. But then, I noticed something strange on Dr. Wilson's desk. There was a notebook lying open, and the pages were covered in strange symbols and diagrams. I didn't understand what they meant, but I felt uneasy just looking at them. As time went on, strange things began to happen at our school. Students reported seeing shadowy figures lurking in the hallways, and some even claimed to have seen Dr. Wilson talking to these figures. One day, I decided to confront Dr. Wilson about these strange happenings. She just smiled at me and said that I had nothing to worry about. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. That night, I had a terrifying dream. In the dream, I saw Dr. Wilson conducting some sort of dark ritual in the school basement. I woke up in a cold sweat, feeling like something was very wrong. The next day, I decided to investigate. I went down to the school basement and found a locked door. I managed to find the key, and what I saw when I opened that door was beyond anything I could have imagined. Inside the room, Dr. Wilson had set up a makeshift laboratory. There were cages filled with rats, beakers filled with strange liquids, and tables covered in books and papers. But what caught my attention the most was the strange altar in the corner of the room. It was covered in candles and strange symbols, and I felt an intense feeling of dread wash over me. As I moved closer to the altar, I heard a strange whispering in my ear. I turned around but saw no one. Suddenly, I felt a sharp pain in my side, and everything went black. When I woke up, I was in the hospital. I had been stabbed by an unknown assailant, and the doctors told me that I was lucky to be alive. The police investigated, but they found no trace of Dr. Wilson or anyone else involved in the attack. It wasn't until much later that I found out the truth. Dr. Wilson had been using students as test subjects for her twisted experiments. and the shadowy figures that students had been seeing were the result of her dark magic. I knew that I had to put a stop to her before it was too late. I reported everything to the school authorities, and they immediately launched an investigation. Dr. Wilson was eventually arrested, and the school began the process of healing from the trauma that she had inflicted. But to this day, I still have nightmares about what I saw in that basement. And I can't help but wonder if there are other dark forces lurking in our world, just waiting to be uncovered. It was a typical hot summer day when Mary and her family moved into their new house. They were thrilled with their new home, but there was one thing that seemed a little off: a locked attic door in the hallway. After a few weeks of settling in, Mary's curiosity got the best of her. She asked her mom about the attic and why it was locked. Her mom just shrugged and told her it was probably just an old storage space. Mary wasn't satisfied with that answer, but she didn't push the issue. One day, Mary was playing in her room when she heard a faint noise coming from above her. She wasn't sure what it was at first, but then she realized it was coming from the attic. She went to the hallway and looked up at the locked door. The noise continued, almost as if someone was knocking on the door from the inside. Mary's curiosity got the best of her once again, and she decided to investigate. She found a small ladder in the garage and brought it inside, positioning it under the attic door. She climbed up and tried to unlock the door, but it wouldn't budge. That's when she noticed something strange. There were toys stacked up against the door, as if someone had placed them there to keep the door shut. Mary pushed the toys aside and tried the door again. This time, it opened with ease. As Mary climbed up into the attic, she was hit with a wave of musty air. The attic was filled with old boxes and furniture, but there was something else, a strange energy that seemed to be emanating from the room. Mary couldn't explain it, but she felt like she was being watched. As she explored the room, she came across an old toy chest. The lid was slightly ajar, and Mary could see that it was filled with dolls and stuffed animals. She thought it was strange that someone would keep toys in an attic, but she brushed it off and continued to look around. That's when she noticed something moving in the corner of her eye. She turned around to see a doll standing upright on its own. Mary froze in fear as the doll began to move, its joints creaking as it walked towards her. The other toys in the chest also began to move, and before she knew it, Mary was surrounded by a horde of possessed dolls and stuffed animals. They began to attack her, their small hands and limbs flailing at her as she tried to escape. Mary managed to climb down the ladder and slam the attic door shut, but the toys continued to pound on the door from the inside. She told her parents what had happened, but they didn't believe her. Over the next few weeks, strange things began to happen in the house. Mary would hear the toys moving and talking in the attic, and sometimes they would even appear in her room. Her parents still didn't believe her, and they thought she was just imagining things. But one night, Mary's parents were awakened by a loud banging coming from the hallway. They rushed out of the room to find that the attic door was wide open and the toys were scattered throughout the house. The dolls and stuffed animals had come to life and were wreaking havoc on the family. Mary's parents tried to fight them off, but it was no use. The toys were too powerful, and they seemed to have a mind of their own. In the end, the Johnson family was never seen again. The house was left abandoned, and no one wanted to go near it because they knew the cursed toys still lurked somewhere in the shadows, waiting to claim their next victim. As the days passed, the family tried their best to ignore the strange occurrences, but they couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them. Every time they entered the attic, they could feel a malevolent presence watching them from the darkness. One night, the youngest daughter woke up screaming, claiming that one of the toys had crawled into bed with her and whispered terrible things in her ear. Her parents tried to reassure her that it was just a bad dream, but they could see the fear in her eyes. Things only got worse from there. The family began to hear strange noises at night, like the sound of tiny footsteps running across the floor. They found the toys in places where they hadn't put them, and they would move on their own when no one was looking. The father decided to investigate, and he went up to the attic armed with a flashlight and a sense of dread. As he made his way through the cluttered space, he could feel the hairs on the back of his neck standing up. He reached out to grab a toy that was sitting on a shelf, but as soon as his hand touched it, he felt a jolt of electricity shoot through his body. He stumbled back, dazed and disoriented, and suddenly the toys sprang to life. They swarmed around him, crawling up his legs and wrapping themselves around his arms. He screamed for help, but no one could hear him over the cacophony of cackling and squeaking toys. When the family woke up the next morning, they found the attic door wide open and their father gone without a trace. They searched the entire house, but he was nowhere to be found. It was as if he had been swallowed up by the cursed toys. Years later, the family moved out of the house, unable to bear the memories of what had happened. But to this day, people in the neighborhood still talk about the strange noises they hear coming from the abandoned house, and some swear they've seen the toys moving in the attic window at night. The cursed toys remain, waiting for their next unsuspecting victim to stumble upon them and seal their fate. To stumble. The old ballet studio sat nestled in a quiet, forgotten corner of the city. It had once been a grand building, a place where young girls dreamed of becoming prima ballerinas, but now it was just a decaying relic of a bygone era. The floors creaked underfoot, the mirrors were cracked, and the faded tutus hung limply from their hooks. Despite its sorry state, the old ballet studio held a certain fascination for local teenagers. They whispered tales of strange noises and ghostly apparitions seen dancing in the shadows. Some even claimed that the old ballerina who had once taught there still haunted the place. One evening, a group of teenage girls decided to explore the old studio for themselves. They sneaked in through a broken window and tiptoed across the dusty floor, giggling nervously as they passed the silent rows of ballet shoes. As they reached the far end of the studio, they noticed a strange sight. A single ballerina stood in the center of the room, her back to them. She wore a beautiful, flowing tutu, and her arms were outstretched in graceful arcs. The girls froze, unsure what to do. Suddenly, the ballerina began to move. Slowly at first, but then with increasing speed and agility, she danced a complicated routine. Her movements were precise and fluid, her feet barely touching the ground. The girls watched, mesmerized. As the dance came to an end, the ballerina turned to face the girls. But instead of a human face, they saw a grotesque mask staring back at them. Its features were twisted and distorted, and its eyes glowed with an unnatural light. The girls screamed and turned to flee, but the door was blocked by a solid wall of darkness. The ballerina began to laugh, a sound that echoed and reverberated through the old studio. Her movements became jerky and disjointed, her tutu frayed and tattered. With each passing moment, she seemed less like a ballerina and more like a monster. The girls huddled together, too terrified to move. The ballerina danced closer, her movements now erratic and violent. One of the girls tried to run, but the ballerina's outstretched arm caught her by the throat. The other girls watched in horror as she was lifted off the ground, her body convulsing in the ballerina's grip. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the ballerina stopped. She dropped the girl to the ground and turned to face the others. Her mask seemed to melt away, revealing a face that was twisted and scarred, but still unmistakably human. The ballerina spoke in a voice that was barely more than a whisper. "Leave this place," she said. "It belongs to me." The girls needed no further encouragement. They ran as fast as they could, stumbling and tripping over each other in their haste to escape the old ballet studio. They never spoke of what they had seen to anyone, but they never forgot it either. And whenever they passed by the old building, they could still hear the faint sound of music and laughter coming from within, reminding them that the ballerina still danced in the shadows. As the girls stumbled out of the old ballet studio, they thought they had escaped the ballerina's clutches. But as they made their way down the dark alleyway, they heard the sound of footsteps behind them. They turned to see the ballerina emerging from the shadows, her tattered tutu dragging on the ground. The girls screamed and ran, but the ballerina was faster. She caught up to them in seconds, her grotesque mask now fixed in a permanent grin. One by one, the girls fell to the ground, their bodies convulsing as the ballerina's icy grip tightened around their throats. As the last girl breathed her final gasp, the ballerina dropped her lifeless body to the ground. She looked around at the empty alleyway, satisfied that her reign of terror had come to an end. The ballerina disappeared back into the old ballet studio, and the only sound that could be heard was the faint echo of her laughter. The city authorities would never know what happened to the missing girls, but some say that on quiet nights, you can still hear their screams echoing through the old alleyway. Screams echo